Welcome to While We Were Distracted, the podcast where we explore topics that often get overshadowed in the rush of daily life.
Imagine you are sitting down with your morning coffee, right? You open up the news and you see this headline. A massive multinational tech company is planning to release 32 million mosquitoes into your state.
Oh, yeah. That is...
I mean, if you are living in Florida or California right now, that is not a hypothetical. That is an actual plan currently in motion. And honestly, for most people reading that, it sounds less like a public health initiative and, a lot more like the plot of a sci-fi horror movie.
It really is a jarring headline. I mean, you hear millions of mosquitoes being intentionally released, and the immediate instinctive reaction is just this kind of primal panic.
Oh, absolutely.
We are conditioned to see mosquitoes as the ultimate enemy.
Right.
And, I mean, the data backs that up, right? Statistically speaking, they are the deadliest animal on the planet.
Yeah.
They're responsible for immense human suffering through disease transmission.
Yeah.
So the idea of a massive corporation backing up a truck and letting millions more of them loose, it just feels entirely counterintuitive to everything we know about pest control.
Right. You immediately picture swarms blocking out the sun, an infinite number of itchy bites, completely ruined summer barbecues. But there is a massive twist to the story. Today's deep dive is looking at an experimental use permit filed by Google. Yes, that Google, specifically their parent company, Alphabet, to release 32 million bacteria-treated mosquitoes into Florida and California.
Yeah, the Alphabet connection always surprises people.
It's wild. Okay, let's unpack this because our mission today isn't just to figure out what this plan actually is. We need to figure out the mechanisms behind it. And more importantly, we need to understand why a tech giant, an entity you normally associate with search algorithms and artificial intelligence, is suddenly treating a biological insect like, well, a hardware problem.
To understand that tech connection, we first have to establish the biological foundation of a program within Google called the Debug Initiative.
Debug. Catchy name.
Right, it's clever. And this is a project that has actually been operating quietly for about a decade. Its stated purpose is to reduce the transmission of diseases spread by mosquitoes worldwide. And to achieve that, they are utilizing a biological mechanism that completely flips the script on how we handle pest control. But to wrap our heads around this, we really have to clear a major mental hurdle. We have to understand how putting more bugs into an environment can actually result in a catastrophic population collapse for that specific insect.
Which on its face feels like trying to put out a house fire by pouring like a tanker truck of gasoline onto the roof.
Yeah.
I mean, if I have a mosquito problem, the absolute last thing I want is more mosquitoes.
Exactly. It makes no sense until you look at the microbiology.
So walk us through the actual biology here. How does adding millions of bugs decrease the total number?
It all comes down to a naturally occurring bacteria called Wolbachia pipientis.
Wolbachia.
Yeah, and to be clear, Wolbachia is incredibly common. It already exists naturally in about 60% of all insect species. So we're talking butterflies, bees, you name it.
Oh, wow. I had no idea.
It's everywhere. But crucially, it does not naturally occur in the specific disease-carrying mosquitoes that cause so much trouble for human beings. So what scientists discovered is that if you take laboratory-bred male mosquitoes and intentionally infect them with this Wolbachia bacteria, it fundamentally alters their reproductive capabilities.
Alters it how? Are we talking about making them sterile, like some kind of biological birth control?
It is similar in outcome, for sure, but the mechanism is different and much more targeted. When one of these Wolbachia-infected males is released into the wild and mates with a wild, uninfected female mosquito, the bacteria causes something called cytoplasmic incompatibility.
Cytoplasmic incompatibility. Okay, break that down for us. What is actually happening at a microscopic level when they meet?
Essentially, the sperm from the infected male and the egg from the wild female are just out of sync at a cellular level. When the sperm enters the egg, the chromosomes do not align properly during that critical first cell division.
Oh, I see.
But the female doesn't know that. She still goes about her business. She takes a blood meal, she finds a pool of standing water, and she lays her eggs exactly as she normally would.
But the eggs are ruined.
Exactly.
Right.
Because of that chromosomal mismatch caused by the Wolbachia, those eggs are fundamentally unviable. They will never develop. They simply do not hatch. 0 offspring emerge.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because essentially what Google is doing is sending out blanks from an ammunition factory. The wild females have absolutely no idea they are mating with a compromised male. They spend their entire reproductive energy on a batch of eggs that will never see the light of day.
Yep.
And because those eggs don't hatch, the overall population in that target area shrinks dramatically with every successive generation.
It is stealth warfare at a microscopic level. I mean, instead of spraying toxic chemicals over a neighborhood to kill the adults, you are sabotaging the next generation before it can even begin.
But I have to stop right here and point out a crucial detail for you, the listener. Especially if you are in Florida or California and you are currently scratching imaginary bug bites just thinking about 32 million incoming bugs.
The panic is real.
It is. We have to address the biting issue because my immediate thought is that if millions of mosquitoes are released in my county, I'm going to get eaten alive every time I step outside to get the mail.
That is the most common concern, hands down. But there is a biological fact that makes this entire operation possible without causing a massive public nuisance. Only female mosquitoes bite.
I always forget that. It's only the females that are actually looking for blood.
Correct. Male mosquitoes simply lack the mouth parts to pierce human skin. They sustain themselves entirely on flower nectar and plant juices.
Like bees, almost.
Basically. The females, on the other hand, require the dense protein found in human or animal blood specifically to develop their eggs. So, because Google's debug initiative goes to extreme lengths to only release the male mosquitoes, you are not going to see any increase in the biting population.
That's amazing.
You could have 1,000 of these Wolbachia-treated males swarming your patio, and not a single one of them would bite you.
That completely changes the mental picture. They are just releasing millions of nectar-sipping males whose only biological imperative is to go out, find a wild female, and ensure she never successfully has babies.
What's fascinating here is the sheer elegance and precision of the strategy. I mean, for over a century, human beings have tried to fight mosquitoes with blunt force trauma.
Yeah, just blanket spraying everything.
Right. We spray massive amounts of chemical pesticides. We send fogging trucks through entire neighborhoods at dusk. And while that can temporarily knock down the biting population, it is a blunt instrument with widespread ecological consequences.
Because it kills everything else.
Right, exactly. Chemical pesticides kill off beneficial insects, they disrupt a local food web, and perhaps, most frustratingly, the mosquitoes eventually just mutate and build up chemical resistance anyway.
Right, it's an arms race we are currently losing.
We are losing it badly. This strategy, however, uses the bug's own natural mating behaviors as the ultimate weapon. It is highly targeted. The male mosquito will actively seek out the female of his exact species, even if she is hiding under a deck or in some discarded tire full of water where chemical sprays could never reach.
Oh, that makes so much sense.
And it leaves the bees, the butterflies, and everything else in the ecosystem completely untouched.
It sounds incredibly futuristic, like cutting-edge 21st century biotech. You're bacterially modifying a population to wipe itself out. But as we were digging into the sources for this deep dive, I noticed that manipulating insect reproduction isn't actually a new Silicon Valley invention.
Not at all. The underlying philosophy here traces its roots back to a concept known as this sterile insect technique, or SIT, and that has actually been actively used in agriculture and public health since the 1950s.
The 1950s. So we were dropping sterilized bugs out of airplanes before we even had widespread commercial jet travel or color television?
We were. Now, traditional SIT is slightly different from what Google is doing. Traditional SIT relies on capturing male insects and hitting them with a dose of radiation to make them sterile, rather than using a bacteria like Wolbachia.
Ah, okay. Radiation versus bacteria.
Right. But the end goal is the exact same. Flood the zone with non-viable males to collapse the population. And we've used the radiation method with incredible success on agricultural pests, like fruit flies and codling moths.
Sure.
But perhaps the most dramatic and vital application of traditional SIT was against something called the New World screwworm.
Okay, I read the name in the outline, but the sources didn't go into detail on what a screwworm actually is. Why was that such a massive target in the 1950s?
It is an incredibly gruesome pest. The New World screwworm is actually a type of fly larvae. And unlike a normal maggot that feeds on decaying or dead tissue, the screwworm fly specifically lays its eggs on the edges of open wounds on living, warm-blooded animals.
Oh, wow. That is awful.
It really is.
Yeah.
This primarily affects cattle, wildlife, and even household pets. When those eggs hatch, the larvae literally burrows deep into the living flesh of the host animal. In fact, agricultural reports describe their burrowing action as being like a wood screw being driven down into the muscle.
Wow. Okay, that is horrifying. I can completely see why eradicating that was a top priority.
It was devastating for the U.S. cattle industry, causing hundreds of millions of dollars in losses, not to mention the immense animal suffering. But by utilizing the sterile insect technique breeding, millions of sterile screwworm flies and releasing them continuously across the southern United States and down into Central America to meet with the wild population, the U.S. successfully pushed the screwworm completely out of North America.
That's a huge victory. But the sources also know this isn't just ancient agricultural history. There was a recent outbreak mentioned in the Florida Keys.
Yes, in 2017, a localized screwworm outbreak started threatening the endangered key deer population down in Florida. It was a genuine crisis for wildlife management.
So what did they do?
Well, their solution wasn't to try to round up and medically treat hundreds of wild deer. They immediately brought in the sterile flies. They used that 70-year-old technique to flood the island with sterile males, collapse the outbreak, and save the deer herd.
Okay, this brings us to the biggest question I have about this entire operation. I'm putting on my skeptical learner hat here.
Let's hear it.
If the strategy of sterilizing insects is 70 years old, and we know for a fact it works brilliantly on screwworms and fruit flies, why hasn't it solved the global mosquito problem yet?
That is the million-dollar question.
Furthermore, the source material explicitly mentions that local mosquito control districts in Florida already released Wolbachia-treated mosquitoes just last year on their own, and it was successful enough that they are planning to do it again. So if the biology is settled and local governments are already capable of doing this, why on earth do we need a massive multinational tech company like Google to step in?
That is the core friction of this entire story. The answer lies in an incredibly frustrating physical bottleneck. Mosquitoes are notoriously difficult to manufacture. The source material highlights this clearly.
So it's a production problem.
Exactly.
Yeah.
While releasing sterile or Wolbachia-treated males works beautifully in theory and works in small, localized pilot programs like a few neighborhoods in the Florida Keys, it has rarely worked with mosquitoes at a large enough scale to actually halt the transmission of a disease across an entire city or region.
Why is that? Are they just harder to catch and breed than a fly?
It is entirely a numbers and fragility game. To collapse a wild population, you cannot just release a few hundred males. You have to absolutely overwhelm the local environment so that a wild female is statistically almost guaranteed to encounter an infected male rather than a wild one.
So you need massive volume.
We're talking release ratios of 10 to 1. You need massive, unbelievable numbers. And mosquitoes, compared to a robust screwworm fly, are incredibly delicate creatures.
Right. If you swat a fly, it might bounce off the window, but if you barely touch a mosquito, it basically disintegrates.
Exactly. Rearing them, feeding them, keeping them alive, and then transporting them in the sheer volume necessary to impact a regional population has historically been a logistical nightmare. But the absolute biggest hurdle, the reason it has never scaled, is the sorting process.
Because you have to separate the males from the females before release?
Yes. Remember, if you accidentally release thousands of Wolbachia-infected females along with the males, those females will still bite humans, they will still be a nuisance, and you run the real risk of establishing a new replacement population instead of collapsing the old one.
Right.
So you have to sort them. And historically, sex-sorting mosquitoes was a painstaking manual process done by technicians peering through microscopes, literally pulling pupae apart one by one. You simply cannot sort millions of mosquitoes a week by hand.
So we have a biological weapon that works perfectly, but we literally cannot build a factory capable of producing it fast enough. That is where the light bulb goes on for why Google is here. The biology is solved. This is a manufacturing and scaling problem.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, think about what tech companies actually do. Silicon Valley is fundamentally built on the principle of scale.
Oh, for sure.
Whether it's processing billions of search queries a second, serving up millions of videos globally, or managing massive server farms, they know how to take complex, chaotic systems and automate them. They know how to engineer away bottlenecks. The Debug initiative is essentially taking software engineering principles and applying them to insect husbandry.
How exactly are they doing that? Because you can't just write a line of code to sort a physical insect.
They are leveraging automated robotics, artificial intelligence, and computer vision.
Oh.
Yeah. Instead of a human with a microscope, imagine automated rearing facilities where the mosquitoes are kept in perfectly climate-controlled environments. When the mosquitoes are in their pupa stage, right before they become flying adults, the males are microscopically smaller than the females.
Okay.
So Debug has engineered high-throughput, Automated sieves and AI-driven optical sensors that can rapidly scan, sort, and separate the male pupa from the female pupa at blistering speeds.
So they are building a better, smarter factory using optical sensors and AI as quality control?
Precisely. They are tackling the physical fragility of the mosquito through advanced engineering. And the Federal Register notice gives us a glimpse into exactly how confident they are in this technology. Google's permit requests the release of 16 million laboratory-bred Wolbachia-treated male mosquitoes in Florida and California in just the first year of the experiment.
16 million in year one. That is an industrial scale.
Followed by another 16 million in the second year. Now, the official notice doesn't specify exactly which counties or cities will see these tests, or the exact dates, but 32 million perfectly sorted mosquitoes over 2 years is a massive leap forward in global capacity.
Yeah, that's unbelievable.
It requires incredibly sophisticated technological infrastructure just to ensure that out of 16 million bugs, virtually 0 biting females make it out the door.
Okay, so we understand the biological weapon, the Wolbachia-induced reproductive dead end. And we understand the factory Google's automated AI-driven sorting tech that solves the scale problem. Let's talk about the targets, because we aren't engineering these massive robotic insect factories just so people can enjoy their patios in peace. The stakes are profoundly higher than that.
They are. Mosquitoes are vectors for some of the most debilitating and deadly viruses on the planet. Public health data consistently shows that common mosquito-borne illnesses include dengue, malaria, West Nile virus, chikungunya, yellow fever, and Zika.
It's a terrifying list.
These aren't just nuisance diseases. They permanently alter lives, they place massive burdens on global healthcare systems, and they cause widespread mortality, particularly in developing nations.
As we dig into the targets, it becomes clear that not all mosquitoes are the same. You can't just treat them as one big monolithic enemy.
Right.
If Google has mastered the factory for one type of mosquito, why are they filing a new permit? Have they finished the job? The sources highlight that the Debug initiative is currently shifting its crosshairs.
That shift is a crucial part of this new permit. Historically, the Debug program has focused heavily on one very specific, very dangerous species of mosquito, the Aedes aegypti.
Which is responsible for what, exactly?
The Aedes aegypti is the primary transmitter for dengue fever, the Zika virus, yellow fever, and chikungunya.
Got it.
It is an incredibly aggressive, daytime-biting mosquito that is highly adapted to living alongside human beings in urban environments. Controlling the Aedes aegypti has been the holy grail for public health officials in tropical and subtropical regions for a very long time.
But according to the new request filed by Google, they are pivoting away from that target in this specific trial. Assistant Professor Eric Caragata from the University of Florida, who specializes in mosquito-microbe interactions, points out that this new permit targets an entirely different variety.
Yes, the new target species for this multi-million release is the Culex quinquefasciatus mosquito.
Which is a totally different beast. What does this one carry?
The Culex quinquefasciatus carries a different payload of diseases. It is a known vector for the West Nile virus and St. Louis encephalitis, which are major public health concerns in parts of the United States.
So what does this all mean? If you think back to our automated factory analogy, it means Google isn't just scaling up a single product line and coasting.
Exactly.
By shifting from the Aedes aegypti to the Culex quinquefasciatus, they are essentially having to completely rebuild and recalibrate their massive breeding technology. They are facing a totally different enemy with different breeding habits, different physical characteristics, different pupa sizes, and different fragilities.
Yeah, they have to prove that their artificial intelligence and automated sorting systems can adapt to a completely new biological variable and still maintain that massive multi-million scale without errors.
Which is the true test of this technology.
Absolutely. If they can successfully suppress the Culex mosquito in California and Florida, just as they've targeted the Aedes mosquito elsewhere, it proves that their technological platform is truly adaptable.
Right.
It means we might finally have a scalable, chemical-free tool that can be rapidly retooled to fight back against multiple vectors of disease on a regional or even national level. It is a perfect synthesis of public health biology and Silicon Valley industrial engineering.
It really is incredible when you step back and look at the whole picture. Let's summarize the journey we've taken today, because we covered a lot of ground and dispelled a lot of initial assumptions. We started with a headline that honestly sounded terrifying: Google releasing 32 million mosquitoes in the U.S. It immediately triggers that sci-fi horror movie panic, but then we peeled back the layers to see the mechanisms at work.
We saw that the core biological concept disrupting insect reproduction is actually a deeply traditional 70-year-old method that we've used safely to eradicate massive agricultural horrors like the screwworm.
We learned how the Wolbachia bacteria acts as a stealth weapon, a biological mismatch that stops the mosquito eggs from ever dividing and hatching, ensuring the population collapses without a single new female mosquito ever biting you.
Exactly.
And most importantly, we answered the why. We discovered why a search engine giant is involved. Because defeating the mosquito isn't a problem of biology anymore, it's a problem of scale. It is a massive, incredibly fragile manufacturing problem that requires computer vision, AI sorting, and robotics to solve.
It's taking the ethos of the tech world, identifying an inefficient bottleneck and engineering a scalable solution, and applying it to public health to save human lives from deadly viruses like West Nile and Zika.
It fundamentally changes how you look at the involvement of these massive tech companies in our physical world. They aren't just in our phones. They are trying to redesign the logistics of nature, which I think leaves us with a really fascinating tension to ponder.
This raises an important question, and it's a dynamic I want you, the listener, to mull over after this deep dive. We are watching a software and technology company use algorithms, AI, optical sensors, and mass manufacturing to successfully hack and collapse a biological population.
Yeah.
In this specific case, it is being done for a universally vital cause stopping the spread of deadly human diseases. But we are undeniably blurring the lines between computer science and ecological engineering. We are treating living ecosystems like a line of code that can be debugged. So, at what point does the tech industry's logic of rapid scaling and optimization clash with the sheer, unpredictable complexity of nature's web?
That is a phenomenal thought to leave on, because today it is a 32 million mosquito operation aimed at stopping West Nile virus, carefully monitored by biologists. But once you build the automated factory, once you perfect the technology of hacking a species at an industrial scale, well, the power to reshape our physical environment becomes immense.
That does.
The sci-fi horror headline we started with might not be horror, but it is certainly the new, complex reality we all have to navigate. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep asking questions, keep looking past the sensational headlines to find the mechanisms underneath, and always search for the why hidden just below the surface. We'll catch you on the next one.
Don't forget to like and subscribe for the next episode on While We Were Distracted.